In this lecture, we're going to cover object hierarchies and groups. Let's talk about keeping your worlds organized. As you start building more complex scenes in the Meta Horizon Worlds editor, you'll quickly realize the importance of efficient management. That is where object grouping comes into play. It's an absolutely essential tool for any serious builder. So, what exactly is object grouping? Simply put, it is the ability to combine multiple individual objects into a single cohesive unit. Imagine building a house. You have walls, windows, a roof, a door, maybe some furniture. Moving each of these pieces as such would be a nightmare, but with grouping, you can select all the components of your house, group them together, and then treat the entire house as one single object. There are several comparing reasons why you'll want to make grouping a core part of your workflow. First of all, unified manipulation. Once all objects are grouped, you can select the group and move, rotate, or scale all the objects within it simultaneously. This saves an enormous amount of time and ensures that all components stay perfectly aligned to each other. Your hierarchy panel over here, which lists all the objects in your world, can get very long and messy. Grouping allows you to create neat, collapsible folders as such for related objects, making your scene much easier to navigate and understand. Think of it like creating folders on your computer to keep your files tidy. Behavior and properties. You can often set some of the properties or behaviors on a parent group that apply to all of its children. For instance, you might make an entire group visible or invisible, which would toggle the visibility of all of its children, or make it collidable or non-collidable with a single click, rather than adjusting each piece individually. Finally, is performance. We can toggle, as I mentioned previously, the collidability and visibility of objects, which we may not need at this point in time, but we may want to make visible at some point in the future. For instance, when a player gets to this section of your experience, so we do want this house to be rendered in view. So we've discussed the benefits of grouping and what it is. Let's talk about how to actually group objects in the 2D editor. First, you need to select all the objects you want to group. You can do this in a couple of ways. In the scene view, which is this window here, you can hold down the control button and click on each individual object you want to include in the group. You can also, as we mentioned in previous videos, select and drag a selection box to select multiple objects at once. And we can double check in the hierarchy that it has actually successfully created a selection of all the elements that we want, of all the objects that we are interested in. Alternatively, if you don't want to use the scene view or you really need to nitpick particular objects, we can use the hierarchy panel on the left, and once again we can use control click to select individual objects in the hierarchy, or if we hold shift and select, for instance, a range, we can also do that and select a range of objects. Then, once we've got these objects selected, we can simply right click in the hierarchy and then go to create a parent object, or the shortcut control G. When we do that, it creates a new empty object at the center of the selection. You can see the empty object is here. This empty object is not visible in play mode. So if I jump into play mode, even with the world simulation off, we can double check. You can see the empty object is not visible. And the group is essentially created. Working with groups, I highly recommend giving it a good name. So for instance, container, house, something like this. This makes it relevant. And then if we look at the small arrow here on the very, very left side of the group, we can expand it and we can see that all of our objects are nested under this empty object or group in a way. Then if we have the group selected, we can have a look over here on the right side in the properties panel. We've got attributes such as its position. And as I mentioned, now we can move the entire group altogether without worrying about the individual elements being misaligned. Same goes for the rotation, so this would be the E key. We can rotate and snap and rotate the entire group. Again, even for scaling, we can scale uniformly. So if I can manage to select the central point, there we go. So there we go. We'll just double the scale of our house. Let's just put it into position. So if for some reason you want to make your objects absolutely ginormous, you can do. And thanks to groups, all of the elements inside the group will be scaled uniformly. So let's just undo that using Control and Z. There we go. Back to where we were. Right, let's talk about working with groups. Adding, removing, and nesting. Adding objects to an existing group is pretty straightforward. Let's say I have another container, one of these containers. I can press Control and D to duplicate, and because it's already in a group or inside this empty object, quote-unquote, folder, it will automatically be added to this group. Now I can hold Control, drag up, and all of a sudden we've got an extra level in our house. Great, very straightforward, right? But what if, for instance, you don't want to duplicate existing objects and you want to add a new object to the group? Well, we can go ahead and put the objects in the world, which will add it to the hierarchy. Then let's position it where we roughly want it to be as part of the group. Say I want to have a small step here by the entrance, maybe scale it up a bit like this. So again, you would probably use something like a cube for this instead of a pyramid, but hey, it works for now. There we go. So something like this, a nice little step, and maybe I'll even rename it to the step. All you have to do is quite simply drag and drop the newly created object into the group, and it will be added at the very bottom in the hierarchy of the group. Now, if we cascade the group, we can see the object is in fact part of the group. If we select the group and move, you can see now the object also moves as part of the group. Removing objects is exactly the same. You can simply press and then drag and ungroup them from the group. It's a bit finicky. You have to keep an eye on the small sort of but line that comes up that indicates where the objects will be placed. So we can see here it will be placed outside of the group. Again, I can put it back in the group. So it's very straightforward. Or we could just press delete and that would delete the step from the group and from the world itself. So let's Control Z and do that. We can also group groups within groups. So for instance, if I am interested in just selecting all the frames of our house over here, so this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, there we go, 5. So we've got five frame groups. We can do the same again. Having selected them using Control, we can do create a parent object, and all of a sudden, all of our frames, let's call it house frames, are now part of a separate group within our original group. So it's almost like a folder within a folder. And again, if we scale, let's click. If we scale and rotate, we can see we're only scaling and rotating these individual objects within the group itself. I also mentioned that behaviors that you apply in the properties panel will also be reflected in the children. So for instance, if I go into preview mode right now, try to get into that property or into this container house, we can see that it has its collisions on. To confirm that, I can also go into the collision view. We can see obviously it has collisions and colliders. However, if I go into container house over here and then disable collidable to false, we can see all of a sudden there's no more orange in the scene, which suggests again there's no colliders. And if I try to run through it, you can see the collisions are now gone from all of the objects in the group. So it's a good way to save on performance, especially if you're using these objects as environmental set pieces. Quite often you don't want them to be collidable or even reflect light and cast shadows. So say for instance you're building a beach or a pathway and you've got some pebbles on the pathway, you'd probably want to avoid having collisions on those pebbles. Again, it's not critical to the gameplay, so yeah, keeping these behaviors off is often good. And as I mentioned, you can also toggle the visibility of the entire group. You can see the boundary box of the entire group on and off. Same goes for motion. If you're looking to animate, you can set all of it to animated, or even more interesting, we can also set it to interactive. Let's bring it up and enable physics. We can also enable physics on the entire group. So now if I start world simulation, we can see the entire group is being affected by physics, but obviously I should probably enable code colliders, otherwise it would just fall through. But there we go. We've got a physics-driven container house in just a few clicks. And without groups, we would have to go to each of these individual objects and change their behaviors here. We can also group select, but again, changing it in a group is a lot easier. So let's disable interactive and bring our house back down. There we go. That is grouping and nested grouping. I would say that mastering object grouping will dramatically improve your efficiency and even the clarity in the hierarchy of your projects. It's a fundamental skill for building anything beyond the simplest scenes in Meta Horizon worlds. So practice grouping, experiment with nesting, and enjoy a much tidier and much more manageable creative process as a result.